Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the recent message that again has come from the President-elect of USA, Donald Trump, where he has threatened India that he is going to impose higher tariffs on the Indian exports to United States, given that India also basically have imposed higher tariffs on the American goods. So let us try to understand this in more detail, that what is this entire discussion all about and to what extent the truth to what extent whatever is saying about the tariffs is truth. Now, reiterating his intention of imposing reciprocal taxes, US President-elect Donald Trump has accused India of charging high tariffs and has warned of imposing taxes similar to the ones that New Delhi levels. Now, this is not for the first time that he has threatened countries with imposing higher tariffs once he takes the oath to the office of president. Before that, also he has threatened similarly the countries such as China, Canada, and Mexico. And in this particular statement, which basically he has given at the Mar-a-Lago resort, which is his private resort, he has criticized the charges levied by India on the US exports to India, saying that even for some commodities, some goods, the India is levying tariffs as high as 100%. And this is something which he obviously does not like, and similar tit for tat kind of approach he is going to adopt. Now, in this context, the term that has been referred by him as well as his what you can call as U.S. Secretary of Trade and Commerce, which he has elected, he has used the term reciprocal tariff. What is reciprocal tariff? Now, the reciprocal tariff simply means that if country A imposes higher tariff, let us suppose 70% on a goods originating from country B, then in the same way country B will impose similar 70% of tariff on the good originating from the country A. So basically this is tit for tat approach that I was talking about. So there will be a reciprocity in tariff. If you will impose higher tariff, I will also impose higher tariff. That is basically the dictum with which he is going. Now this basically the discussion statement has come about the question which was asked from him related to the trade agreement with China. What is the possibility of trade agreement with China and whether any kind of tariff will be imposed on China. Now, interestingly, he has invited the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping in his inauguration ceremony that has to be held in the month of January next year. However, in this context, he has avoided the question on China. Rather, what he said that it is the countries like India and Brazil which is levying higher tariffs on the US goods and US export. And basically, India, he said, charges a lot. Brazil charges a lot. If they want to charge us, that's fine. But we are going to charge them the same thing. The same topic we have discussed about the reciprocity. The principle of reciprocity is what he is going to apply. And the new US Trade and Commerce Secretary also has echoed a similar kind of voice that the Donald Trump has said, that reciprocity is bound to be the central subject when it comes to the upcoming Trump administration as far as the economic and trade relationship with the countries are concerned. Now, what exactly has Trump said before earlier on his social media, that is Truth Social, that India has for years now put very high tariffs on the US. It is the king of tariffs. India, he is referring as the king of tariffs. This is unacceptable. So let us try to delve deeper and understand that to what extent his statement is correct. Now, this is the data that has been taken from the WTO. And if you compare major countries and their tariff rate, we can see that indeed to some extent India is having a very high tariff rate. If you compare, for example, China's average tariff rate is somewhere about between 10 to 12%. On the other hand, India's tariff rate, we can see, is somewhere between 18 to 20%. The country which is charging the highest tariff, as you can see from this particular graph, is the Egypt. So Egypt, India, even talk about the Brazil that he has claimed is charging higher tariffs, even Brazil's tariff is relatively lower than India by at least 3 to 4%. So to some extent what he is saying is true. And if you talk about the US, obviously we can see US tariff rate on the goods originating from other trade partners is very less. If you talk about among all the major countries, major economies of the world, US we can say is charging the least amount of profit, where its average least amount of tariffs, where its average tariff is lying somewhere about 4%, we can say. It's even lesser than European Union and Russia. So to some extent, the concern he has voiced, if you look it from the perspective of US domestic economy, seems to be correct. And in this context, however, India has made a counter argument as well. If talk about the last graph where India's tariff rate seems to be very high, Indian officials have argued that though the tariff rate seems high, it is not something illegal, it is not something that does not follow the international law. If we talk about the international trade agreement, the WTO agreement, the World Trade Organization led agreement, and the rules that it has built up around the global trade is something that India has always adhered to. And even if you look at the numbers or the percentage of average duty and tariff levied by India, it is within the limits agreed as per the WTO rule. So it is within the international rule and law framework. So there is nothing wrong there. Second counter argument that has been given by some officials also, that the way how we are calculating the tariff is different. For example, Indian officials have pointed out that if we calculate or measure tariffs on the terms of the trade weighted average, India comes out better, its tariff rate is not very high. Now, what is trade weighted average? In trade weighted average, what basically is done, the volume of imports that are coming into India, basically they are calculated. And then the average of the tariff on the entire volume of the import basket is calculated, and based on that, the average figure of tariff is recorded. In this way, method of calculation or way of calculation, the tariff rate that India charges becomes significantly lower than if you calculate on the individual basket of goods and services. Now, let us suppose that if the tariff war indeed breaks out and US decides to increase and hike the tariff from the Indian exported goods and services, what can be the impact? So to understand that, before we have to understand that today the US-India trade is much more significant than it was a decade or 2 decades back. If you look at from the beginning of this particular century, in the year 2000, the total trade value between US and India stood somewhere about between 15 to 20 billion dollars. So from 15 to 20 billion dollars, today it has reached to almost 120 to 140 billion dollars. So such a high increase, almost 6 to 7 times increase in the what you can call as the export and import between both countries, are tantamount to the success and the progress both countries have achieved as far as the economic relations are concerned. So any kind of tariff like war can threaten this overall magnitude of the trade, and this will be not only bad for India but also it will be bad for the US economy. If you try to understand the overall composition between the export and import, so India exports more than it imports from US. So we can say that it runs a kind of current account surplus or trade surplus as far as the US is concerned, which is very different from China, which is its second largest trading partner after US. As far as China is concerned, we are running a trade deficit. Now, if you look at the US-India trade relationship, we have discussed that obviously the volume of goods and services being exported and imported has significantly increased. Now, what are the major sectors where the export and import is done? So, top 5 major export that India sends to the US are jewelries, electrical machineries, pharmaceutical products, and the mineral oil, bitumen, and basically petroleum refinery products we can say. Similarly, if you look at the export from the US to India, there also are largely mineral fuels, oils, waxes. Then you have the precious and semi-precious metals and minerals. Then you have the nuclear reactors, boilers and all that. And then you have the air spacecraft including parts, because you know that Boeing, as far as the commercial airline is concerned, commercial navigation is concerned, and then you have the Lockheed Martin. These are the 2 major suppliers of aircraft and aircraft parts as far as India is concerned. So overall, if you look at the total export value from India to US today stood or stand at $75.8 billion. On the other hand, the value of export from the US to India stand at $40 billion only. So that is why we have a surplus of almost $35 billion as far as the Indo-US bilateral economic relation, trade relationship is concerned. And this is something that help us in building and shoring up our foreign exchange reserve, most importantly the US dollar reserve. Now the question comes that how the US-India trade relationship have developed and can be impacted by the tariffs. So obviously we have talked about it is a vital source of foreign exchange for us because we have a favorable trade relationship as far as the US is concerned. Over the past decade only, if we discuss, that means since the 2014, India's reliance on the US market has grown. Today, if you talk about the US alone, it accounts for almost 18% of India's export. In 2010-11, it was just 10%. So almost we can say we have doubled up our share. Similarly, India's export portfolio to US, we have discussed in the last graph, it is diverse, it is not concentrated in a single sector, as opposed to the India's relations with the Middle Eastern countries, where the largest amount of import that we have is coming from the oil and gas sector. So that also helps us in the diversification, help us in ensuring that any impact in any one particular sector of economy does not overall disturb our trade relationship with our largest trading partner. So that is how we have to understand the relations. Now, in this context, when we are talking about the imposition of tariff, the one sector which seems to be very much threatened if US indeed goes ahead with the tariff imposition is the steel sector. And in this context, the US president even has signaled that he is going to impose a higher fresh tariff as far as the steel imports to the US is concerned. And this is not something that is targeted to India. Rather, as if you try to understand, his major voter bank consists of those people who are working in the industrial areas. And that is why he is trying to appeal to that voter base, especially the Rust Belt, as we call it in the United States, where most of your industries are situated. So Trump strongly believes that US steel sector was a wonderful sector, but because of the lower tariffs imposed on the import from countries such as South Korea, Japan, China, India, the US domestic steel sector is losing its signs and are running economic losses. So to improve the domestic steel sector, the only way is to impose higher tariff. Not only that, he also has said that I will save the steel sector of US from any kind of foreign investment. For example, a South Korean company wanted to purchase a steel plant in the Pennsylvania region of US, which he categorically has rejected, that if I become president, or basically now when he become president, he will not allow the South Korea to acquire the steel production unit of US. So this is something that can impact the steel sector of India also, especially in today's context, when Indian steel sector already is at the back foot, because what we have observed in the recent time, that there is a sharp decline in the Indian steel exports. On the other hand, there is a significant increase in the steel imports into India. So already the Indian domestic steel industry is facing a strong threat. And in this context, in this situation, in this scenario, if US also goes ahead and impose tariff, obviously it will be a decimating blow or big blow to the US, to the Indian steel sector. So steel imports into India surged by approximately 41%, while the exports declined by 36%. So by the imposition of tariff, this value can go further, can become further big, and decline can be seen to a much more greater extent. However, in conclusion, we can say that still US president is not in the office. Now, whatever he has said, it's not 100% guaranteed that all these things will be implemented. So anyway, even if it is not implemented, because he is the president-elect, whenever he makes such kind of statement, whenever it threatens his major trading partners such as Canada, Mexico, China, India, it already has caused unsettling in the financial markets and sparked a global reaction. There is a fear that not only the bilateral trade between two countries, but this will also impact the entire global economy. A fresh trade war will begin that will not only impact the what you can call as the unfriendly states that the US thinks US categorizes, or adversary state as it categorizes, but also it will affect the allies similarly. So China, it already has went ahead and criticized the Trump's tariff plan, stating that imposing unilateral tariffs will not resolve America's issues. So this is how we have to understand this particular topic. That is all for this video. I hope you got the gist of this statement and the meaning behind the statement that the President-elect Donald Trump has given as far as the tariff over the Indian exports are concerned. Thank you.